State in the Department of Energy and Mineral Engineering. And the topic for the speech today is Capacity Markets be designed by democracy. Please welcome.
So my name is Rudy Shankar, and sorry I sound tired because I ran from one end of the campus to the other. But we were trying to get more students engaged in our seminar series, and she actually offered to present this because she had done this work with EPRI, I believe, or PJM, and EPRI was involved.
So the gentleman from EPRI saw my presentation.
Okay. That's right. So Dr. Coleman saw the presentation. So we really welcome for all the students out here, please, this is an invitation for you to kind of suggest speaking out here because it's a great experience to come and give a talk.
Good afternoon. I'm Dino. I'm PhD candidate at State. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure. Today I'm going to talk about my dissertation work in progress on the voting behavior of stakeholders in regional transmission organization, or RTOs. As you may all know, RTOs control 2/3 of U.S. electric sales in the U.S. and they're an important entity not just because they operate majority of the grid in the U.S. but also because they implement very important public policies such as tariff and pricing system design, or planning new investments, or integrating new technologies such as renewables. And in terms of making decisions on these sets of public policies, their stakeholders are supposed to have a role in those decisions. Recently, however, there have been some conflicts between keeping this highly participatory stakeholder process and ensuring grid reliability, which is one of their most critical missions. While questions have been raised on their democratic stakeholder process and their voting their outcomes, the process itself has not been modeled in any systematic way. So in this research, Dr. Blumzag and I, we try to answer this question of whether electricity market can be directly designed by the players in those markets. To address this question, in the first part of this research, we tried to develop a predictive model that predicts the voting outcome and examine the possibility to get a passable proposal even with very contentious and divisive issues such as capacity market. And in the second part of this research, we tried to identify who gets to decide the final voting outcome, either as a form of pivotal coalition or as a form of few swing voter group or few pivotal voter group. So for this specific presentation, we focus very much on the PJM and especially the top-level committee called Members Committee for two reasons. Because the Members Committee is the only committee that published the detailed firm-level voting data in public, and second, they have this power with which they can bypass the board of directors in PJM, and then they can make filings directly with FERC. So they have this huge amount of power, and their decision, therefore, is very important. In this slide and the next slide, I'm going to explain the voting structure in PJM. So first, to vote in the members committee, members has to assign itself to one of the 5 industry sectors. Generation owner, transmission owner, electric distributor, which is basically a load-serving entity, most of which are municipalities, and end-use customer, and lastly, it's other suppliers, which is a bunch of etc. group. This other supplier, unlike the other sectors, they are very, very heterogeneous. That includes demand response provider, municipality, and a bunch of other financial players, power marketers, banks, or hedge funds. This is the share of each sectors among over 500 members. And you can see there are many, 70% of them are other suppliers. In terms of voting rules, MC implements what is called sector-weighted voting. It is basically a weighted voting which equally weights sectors. So since there are 5 sectors, each sector gets 20% share of the total voting score, which is 5. So as a result, one sector gets 1 score equally. And voters within the same sector, they share that score, and this means they are inversely weighted by the total number of voters within the sector. On the top, there's a mathematical presentation of the voting score. So it basically counts all the yes votes within the sector and divided by the total number of voters. But this total number of voters excludes the abstention vote. So the more abstention votes there are, the greater voting weight an individual voter would get of that sector. So we can see that the abstention vote here is very different from just voting no. For example, here I presented the hypothetical example. For transmission owner, there are 14 of them that participated in this example, and 8 of them voted yes to this proposal, but 4 of them abstained. So the total voting, the sector voting score of the transmission owner is 8 divided by 14 minus 4, which is 10. So it becomes the 0.8. So it's more complicated than just one person gets 1 vote scheme. It's because the voters' influence on the final voting outcome is highly influenced by which sector they are in. So in a sense, the system encourages voters to talk to each other, at least within the sector. And also, the threshold for this in this system is 2/3 majorities of the total voting score, which is 3.335. And this, in other words, we can say that to block an issue, for a group of voters who wants to block an issue, they need to secure 1/3 of the total voting score, which is 1.665. But that 1.665 is less than 2, which means with less than 2 sectors voters, if they decided to cooperate and decided to block an issue, they can effectively have veto power. So the system encourages forming a coalition not only within the sector, but also across sectors. So next step, we try to have a look on how this coalition formation looks like. I use a network analysis using the voting data for 5 years. So what I did here is that I connected the 2 firms if they vote on the same side, yes or no, on the same issue. And this connection gets thicker as they vote more frequently together. And here, each circle represents each voters in the members committee, and they're located by their sectoral affiliation. So there are generation owner, transmission owner, other supplier, electric distributor, and end-use customer. And finally, the color means the detected community by the network analysis. So what this community means is that voters in the same community, they tend to vote together more frequently to each other compared to with the voters outside their community. So here you can see the community 3 or green community. Most of electric distributor and end-use customer are in this green community. That means they tend to vote together more frequently compared to voting with the voters, for example, in the generation owners. So at this moment, I would expect that in this stakeholder process in PJM members committee, buyer side, consumers have stronger coalition so that we can say that they have stronger political power compared to the supplier side. So in the next chapter, given the strong coalition formation and the voting structure, we wanted to check under which circumstances the stakeholder process is more likely to be deadlocked. So for this analysis, we use very specific voting data on the capacity market. As you may all know, capacity market is kind of a core market for electric capacity, not an output, and it's a mechanism that the PJM and other RTOs use to ensure that they'll have enough capacity to meet the expected future demand. And on 2011, in October, PJM members committee voted on a series of 6 proposals on the same day, and they were all about redesigning their capacity market. And one of the 6 proposals was status quo proposal, so keeping the capacity market exactly the way it is. And interestingly, they all failed, which means that they didn't like the status quo. They wanted some change, but they also didn't like any of the reform proposals. So we wanted to figure out how did this happen throughout this research. This all failed 6 proposals were about reshaping what is called variable resource requirement curve, or VRR curve. It's an estimated demand curve and artificially set through the stakeholder process in PJM. The way that the capacity market clears is that the suppliers submit the capacity offer that constitute the supply curve, and as a demand curve, VRR curve with the supply curve sets the clearing price in the capacity market. And as you can see, this VRR curve is a piecewise linear curve that is determined by the location of points A, B, and C, which also determines the slope of the linear line between those 2 points. And in this specific set of proposals, we figure that there are 2 critical parameters that was very important, which is the level of points A and the points B. And we were able to model all the 6 proposals into the 6 VRR curve. So the dark blue line in the middle, it's the status quo proposal. And for package 1 and 10, which is in the red line, they basically suggest to increase the clearing price, while the package 11, 12, and 13, which is in yellow, blue, and green respectively, they basically suggest to lower the clearing price. So it's very intuitive in the capacity market that the suppliers would support the higher price and consumers would support low price. And based on all this information, we translated all this information into the framework called passive proposal. So it's a framework that assumes that one would prefer a proposal if it increases its utility. And in this context, this utility is a function of clearing price, assuming that their utility only comes from this capacity market. And this clearing price, as we've seen, is the function of the levels of points A and B. So we could model each stakeholder's preference and find this result. So here on the graph on the left, the blue area is the supplier's preferred area of changes in the level of points A and B. So any combination of changes in those areas would increase the clearing price that suppliers would change those, would prefer these changes. And the red area is those of consumers. So what our model predicts is that if a proposal suggests low clearing price, like in this red arrows, then the suppliers would vote against this proposal with the voting weight of 1.95. And the consumers would support this proposal with the voting weight of 2.25. But in either cases, increasing or decreasing price, both supplier and the consumer coalition have enough voting weight to block an issue. So in theory, they both have effective veto power, which means that there could be no proposal that could have been passed through this stakeholder process, at least in members committee, on this capacity market issue. But in practice, what happened, it seems like it's more complicated than that, because there were some defectors from the presumed coalition that, so for example, generators voted for decreasing price, or there were some consumers voted for increasing price, which is not very intuitive, but at this moment we define them as a defector. And because of this defectors and abstention vote, the supplier lost its veto power and consumers gained more voting weight, that the suppliers need to convince other swing voters who doesn't have strong stake in this issue to maintain its veto power. And for consumer coalition, if they convince enough swing voters from the other supplier sector, then they could even force an issue for passage. And this swing voters that they need to convince are primarily the financial players in the other supplier sector. For example, hedge funds and banks. So our assumption at this point is that these defectors or abstentions, they may transfer their voting power to very small group of swing voters in the other supplier sector who are primarily the financial players and they don't have any interest in this capacitive market issue. So in the next part of this research, we try to identify some circumstances under which these small group of swing voters have effective and a large amount of political power. This analysis relies very heavily on the geometric interpretation. So let me explain this graph first. Let's say we consider two sectors A and B among the 5, and a group of voters from these two sectors wants to block an issue. And they form this blocking coalition or a coalition. For this coalition to have effective veto power, they have to have the voting score greater than the blocking threshold that we've seen, which is presented as the red line. And this axis, so x-axis is the number of voters who join this blocking coalition from sector A. Y-axis represents those from sector B. And this blue box defines the possible number of voters from sectors A and B. So this is the total number of voters from sector A, and that is the total number of voters from sector B. So if this combination of voters, the point lands in this area, this blue area, then it means that this blocking coalition has enough voting power so that they can block this issue without any help. They can block it all by itself. But if this point lands in this line, this area, interior of this threshold, then it means they need to convince a few other swing voters to vote in alignment with them. And then we apply this framework to our capacitive market example. So here in this specific example, I use the voting data on the one proposal that suggested the lowest clearing price. So as it suggests a low clearing price, suppliers will want to block this issue. Includes generation owner, and we identify that there is a demand response provider, which we assume that they are the suppliers in the capacity market, and they will join the supplier coalition. So in the x-axis is the number of voters joining this supplier coalition from other supplier sector, and the y-axis is that from the generation also. So our possible proposal model would predict that all the generation owners, so 15 of them, and 8 of the demand response provider from the other supplier sector would join this coalition that is presented as the point X here. And as you can see, it's in the blue area, which means that they have enough voting score to block an issue, so they don't need any help. But like we've seen, after the defection and the abstention, the dynamics of the political power has been changed a little bit. I don't want to get into too much details here, so I will just explain basic concept of how defection and abstention changes this point to here, to the point X3. So, defectors from the presumed coalition. So, generation owners are assumed to join this coalition, but there were some voters, in this case, 4 of generation owners who voted yes to decreasing price. So we define them as defector because generators are supposed to against this proposal. And this defectors would move that point to downwards if that's from the generation owner sector. But if it's from the other supplier sector or the demand response provider, then it would move the point to left. But as you can see, these 4 defectors from the generation owner sector relocated the points interior of the threshold line so that the supplier coalition would need to convince one single voters from other supplier sector to vote with them to block this issue. So essentially, these 4 generators enable this one single voter from other supplier to have large amount of political power. And next is abstention. So abstention, depending on which sector they are from, they rotate this threshold line, and they reduces the size of this possible voter box, meaning the increase in voting weight of individual voters of this sector. So all the combination of effects of the defectors and abstention, the final voting outcome lands in this interior of the threshold line, so that at the end, the supplier coalition would need to convince 3 swing voters from other supplier sectors. So we've seen that the system encourages voters to cooperate and form a coalition. And we also checked that in our theoretical model there are some cases that we wouldn't be able to get a consensus or at least agree on passable proposal. And we also have seen that this formation of the pivotal coalition might depend on convincing very few swing voters who does not have any interest in this issue. So our next step would be from this work to compare different voting rules from other RTOs. So we are looking New York ISO and ISO New England, which also implements the sector-weighted voting, but implements different voting weights. So, for example, New York ISO gives greater weights to generation owners and other suppliers, while ISO New England, they set the 6th sector, which is called alternative resources. So they give more weight to renewable generation and the demand response provider. We wanted to see this behavior, this voting behavior forming the coalition and the defection can also be applied to this other, with the other voting rules, with a little variation. And secondly, this, I want to get a little insights from the floor, if I can. I would really appreciate it, because so after this all failure of this capacity market redesign proposal, what PJM did is they created this alternative process with establishing a committee called Enhanced Liaison Committee. So it's you can imagine it's a Shark Tank committee. So they allow all the stakeholders in the PJM to create a group freely, like voluntarily, and suggest a proposal in front of the PJM board. And PJM board hear all the proposals and they decided the final decision on the reshaping of their capacity market or the VR curve. And the point is, a lot of voting issues are passed through this members committee, and this capacity market voting issue was the only time that they used this alternative process called an ELC committee. So what we are trying to figure out is to come up with a measure or a screen for triggering this alternative process, since it's not very frequent to have a deadlock in this process. So yeah, this is the end of my presentation. I will be glad to take some questions.
I have a question. This is a very important topic, the long-term capacity planning, which used to be done by vertically integrated utilities. And now some have long-term planning for capacity, and some do not. Many do not. Do you feel that in the deregulated market, where the voters mostly vote their pocketbook and short-term interest, can they ever come up with a 10-year plan for having enough electric installed capacity to meet the demand that's likely to be there?
So, not sure I get your question. So, are you asking that they have the long-term vision on the planning side in the teaching?
Yeah, it's not clear to me that there's much incentive for the voting members to come up with a long-term capacity plan, because if you have a long-term capacity plan, it will tend to drive prices down on the market. You'll have more, 15% more reserve than you need. And they would actually like to have much less reserve so the prices in the market go up. So it's not, this is a very important topic that you talk about as to how do we ensure that long-term capacity supply in the continental United States.
Right, exactly. So I also have this sense that they are setting basically the demand curve, and setting this demand curve. While they are setting this demand curve, there are suppliers that are involved in this process. That is, I don't think that is helpful for I don't know, the entire welfare of the country. So we were also trying to find a way to figure out the welfare functions based on this work, but it was pretty difficult because first I don't think it's related, but yeah, I mean there were so we were very struggling on setting up this system and the entire system, since it's very big issue. And honestly, with Dr. Blumzak and I, we think it's better to have an liaison committee and to enable the PJM board to process all these issues regarding the capacity market. So there are other RTOs that doesn't give this big authority to the stakeholder process. So PJM give the biggest authority, biggest power to the stakeholder process, while so in ISO England, they don't allow stakeholders to make direct filings with FERC. And the board can direct filings with FERC, and they can even bypass all the stakeholder process. So I don't think there has not been discussion enough to decide whether it's right or wrong. I mean, you can clearly see that, you know, even that sector definition is very different from each other. I just compare the three RTOs, PJM, ISO, and New York, ISO New England and New York ISO, and there are so many differences from the definition of the sectors and the voting weights and how they calculate the final voting outcome. It's all different, but I don't think there has been enough discussion around this stakeholder process, which is weird to me because it decides literally everything in terms of decisions. So I agree with your idea, but I just don't think there has been enough discussion about it.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know a ton about this area, but it seems like this voting style, if groups of similar technologies or companies that own similar technologies are allowed to vote on price almost as one unit and they're allowed to talk within it, does that actually then sometimes prevent new technologies from emerging in these markets because it's almost like they can collude against competition that would come in and compete against them through price manipulation? Is that happening, or?
There has been some critics about this new technologies, so that I think that's why ISO New England set this another sector called alternative resources. So by giving them more voting weight and allowing them to be involved more in this discussion, that they can compensate this kind of discrepancy. But first, one individual can exercise their votes on their own, not as part of the entire sectors. So if they don't want to agree, if they don't agree with other voters, then they can just vote on their own. But what is true is that if there's no incentives for them to defect from their sector coalition in that sense. Does that?
Yeah, it seems like, just four companies that all have, gas turbines, and they all are going to vote for what's best for gas turbines.
Right.
And if there's a new technology coming on or something like that could be cheaper or something like that, I could see them, we'll sacrifice profits to make sure that this new technology can never go off the ground.
That is, I think, very, very good point. But so the participation on this members committee, it's all, if you are involved in any way in PJM footprint, you can vote on this issue. So if you want, you can form a coalition. They don't block you to form a coalition. They even encourage you to form a coalition and talk to each other. So as small new technology, they might be small, but I think there are, it is the case for any other, industry. So if they really want to change something, they can issue this process and form a coalition and try to speak up. But yes, there are some critics on this stakeholder process that might be harmful for the new technology.
Thank you.
Yeah, I found it unusual that you've seen that consumers are so tightly organized, because the residential consumer is going to prioritize lowest price, the industrial consumer is going to prioritize reliability, because power outages blow your energy budget and hurt.
That is true, but so I've seen, so PJM doesn't restrict anybody to become generation owners. If you have generation power plants, then anybody can become generation owners. So for example, there is one of the 4 defectors, actually two of the defectors from this generation owner sector are industrial users. So they are they are by definition. I mean, on the face, we can just assume that they are the consumers, but they affiliated as a generation owner sector, and there is no restriction on it. But and the other thing that I've seen is that among the consumer side, they share the voters representing this company are the same. So across these consumers, there are many consumer advocates, state authorities, and even the large industrial users. They just designate one person representing multiple companies and voting on behalf of them. So what seems to me is that that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the same opinion. I've seen some different opinions one or two times, but most of the time they have the same opinion if they share one representative in this voting scheme. So I don't know what's going on behind the scene, but it seems to me that a lot of end users and the electric distributor talk to each other before the voting, because they upload this voting issues before the actual voting happens, that they can talk and share the idea.
Is there a kind of regulatory authority, maybe utility guys could answer this, is there a regulatory authority that oversees code of conduct, how this is done? And that may really help, so that there's no kind of interest body taking over, how things are ordered.
Yes, FERC actually monitored the
FERC is okay.
coding. Yes. So there was a big issue in California where government is not independent, and they were forced to be more independent. So government in the eastern part of the country is more independent, but they do monitor how they're voting. They do.
Yeah, and an interesting part of this capacity discussion is FERC and NERC, who sets reliability standards, has no authority to order capacity to be built. It's not within their legal jurisdiction. FERC does have the authority to review overall voting rules and how the voting rules work in general, but the only people that have the power to do anything about giving huge rebates or mandatory generation construction requirements are the state energy planners. The states have the authority to come up with a state energy plan. When you have an RTO that spans 10 states, it's almost impossible to get 10 states to agree on what to propose to PGM. In California ISO obviously was within one state, and they were able to convince the state of California to mandate storage capacity be built to offset some of the sun and wind energy that does not have firm capacity behind it. So it's a very difficult topic on long-term installed capacity as to how we're ever going to get the regulatory infrastructure and the voting structure to actually have a plan now that we're deregulated.
Right. I've heard some about the work on this similar topic, and from her name is Christina Simone from UPenn. She talked about more involvement of the state government, because by involving or giving more voting weight or greater power to state government, we can have, like you said, the long-term strategy across the region, so that it might be more stable. Just because right now they are just one voters own a lot in the end user sector or electric distribution.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting observation, because the people that can mandate capacity energy plans don't really have the authority to rule on the voting
Right.
rules.
Right.
Those that do have the right to vote on the voting rules for each RTO are FERC, which have no legal
Right.
obligation to
Right.
provide capacity for the continental United States.
Right.
We can provide incentives and suggestions, but they don't have the legal authority to mandate construction.
Exactly. So for example, in New York ISO and ISO Newman, they have, instead of having this electric distributor sector, they have public power or publicly owned entity sector, so that they can pursue more public interest on behalf of.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Because I don't know, I'm going to ask, how good, how accurate is the ability to predict what the future demand is going to be, and how does that factor into the voting documents?
Well, I think the process of determining the expected demand, expected peak demand is pretty robust in PJM, I think. They have this model, and this actually the VR occur for 3 years in advance, and so that they can prepare. But in terms of determining this, all the required capacity and installed reserve margin, so on, I'm pretty sure they have the robust technique on calculating those.
Well, I guess I would think that,
Yeah, but of course, yeah, there is a peak demand, the polar vortex, and like there are unexpected events, so that they cannot just expect this natural disaster. But I think besides that, they have pretty robust.
well, that too, I guess what I'm thinking about is that it's possible, I guess it's possible to reliably or robustly predict population changes or
Right,
population
right,
growth,
right.
demographic
Yeah.
evolution. I
Right.
guess I'm assuming that.
Right. There are
But
impacts.
if there's a change in technology and there's a power reduction, or if there's a change in technology and everybody now wants an iPad or something like that, even if they're low power, then how does one predict something like that? I don't know.
I think
I believe there are
that's a question right on the mark. The real issue is the fastest I've seen new firm installed capacity built is about 30 months. And so you need some kind of long-term plan for at least 3 years, or you may not have the capacity you need.
Right.
Predicting 5 years out, 10 years out is a nice academic topic, and they do that. NERC publishes some of those forecasts, but the real rubber hits the road on what if you don't have enough capacity for 3 years from now? What can you do? Because you're not going to have time to decide to build it 6 months ahead of time.
Can we use Puerto Rico as a model? And that's not sarcastic.
The models currently don't include Alaska, Hawaii, or any territories. It's only continental United States.
Yeah, I was thinking of rebuilding it.
As far as I know, there's no capacity requirement in any of the Alaska, Hawaii, or territories. So there's no regulatory structure around forcing something to happen.
All right, so no more questions, another round of applause. And how far are you from your PhD?
I'm expecting to graduate next summer, hopefully.
Great.
Who knows?
Best of luck. Okay, so I guess we would be spending some time. So if you have questions, maybe outside, we have a class here at 5:30. So fortunately, we do have some time. So
I passed the sign-up sheet around, somewhere around here.
Here we go.
does anybody have a chance to sign up?
No,
Okay, yeah.
We're here?
Couldn't get out of this quicker.
Okay,
That's a topic near and dear to our heart.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you never think of that, what are we gonna do when they run capacity someday?
Yeah.